A lot of people ask me what the fuck I've been at the last few years. Shit, I don't know. But I do know. I'm back now. Here comes the rain and thunder now.
Hey, what's up everyone? Today I'm making this video to address a question that's been asked a lot, which is why didn't Japan surrender after the Hiroshima bomb was dropped? Why did it wait to be bombed twice before surrendering? The theory I hear most commonly stated is that it was because they didn't know the US had the capacity to build multiple atomic bombs. They thought the US would only be able to build one atomic bomb. But I think there's a certain elephant in the room that people are ignoring, and that elephant is the Soviet Union. Because you have to take the geopolitics into consideration. Remember, the Soviet Union was neutral throughout much of the Second World War in the Pacific Theater. It was only at the end, August 9th specifically, that they actually declared war on Japan. And I think it was pretty clear to the Japanese leadership that the US and the Soviet Union were going to become rivals after the Second World War was over. And because of that, they thought that their unconditional surrender to the US would not be in the best interests of the Soviet Union, because it would just give the US so much power. So the Japanese leadership thought that they could possibly use the Soviet Union as a mediator to negotiate a conditional surrender where they'd retain some of their sovereignty. But unbeknownst to them, the Soviet Union made an agreement with the Western Allies to enter the war by the 9th of August, the day the second bomb was dropped. So after the first bomb was dropped on Japan, they were pretty certain it was a nuclear bomb, simply because you can just tell by the pattern of damage that it originated from a single point or a single explosion, and there's simply no way you could have gotten 20,000 plus tons of conventional explosives dropped on a city, because there's simply no airplanes that could carry that kind of load. So they were certain that an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. But the Soviet Union at that time was still a potential mediator, which is probably why they did not surrender at that time. But then the 9th of August comes around, and a second bomb is dropped, and the Soviet Union declares war, so it's clear at that point that A, they cannot use the Soviet Union as a mediator, and the US doesn't just have one atomic bomb. So it would be pretty clear to the Imperial Japanese leadership that if they don't surrender unconditionally, they're just going to keep getting nuked. Some have stated that the nuclear bombing, in fact, didn't have anything to do with the surrender of Japan. It was just the entrance of the Soviet Union into the Pacific Theater that made them surrender. But I highly doubt that, because even though they knew that there's no way they could win at that point, well, people always talk about how they constantly said, oh, no surrender, no surrender, it's better to die than surrender, but that's the kind of thing that they just installed in their people to make them fight for them. The Imperial Japanese leadership, or at least a lot of them, didn't necessarily believe that. But I seriously doubt that the Soviet Union's declaration of war is actually what made them surrender, at least on its own, because even if the leaders of Imperial Japan didn't necessarily believe in the Bushido Code absolutely, I have no reason that they'd be any less tenacious than Germany was, and they fought until Berlin was captured. So it's pretty unlikely that they would have announced their intent to surrender, which was on August 10th, just the day after the Soviet Union declared war. So it was probably both factors that caused the surrender of Imperial Japan: the deployment of the nuclear bomb and the entrance of the Soviet Union into the Pacific Theater. And this does kind of call into question the justification for dropping the nuclear bomb, or at least in the manner that we did, because, well, Truman knew Stalin was going to enter the war on August 9th, and he probably also knew that the Japanese viewed the Soviet Union as a potential mediator, and the entrance of the Soviet Union into the Pacific Theater probably would have hastened the surrender of Imperial Japan. So why did Truman drop the bomb on the 6th of August as opposed to the 9th of August? Well, it was probably because he wanted Japan to surrender unconditionally to the U.S. before the Soviet Union could gain any ground in the Orient. Now, the common argument I hear for the justification for the nuclear bomb is that it saved more lives because we wouldn't have had to have an Allied invasion, and plus, thousands of people were dying every day under Japanese occupation. Not all of them were necessarily being killed by the Japanese soldiers. They were, quote unquote, indirect consequences of war. But you know what? As long as the war's going on, they're going to keep dying. So, the most, quote unquote, humane thing to do would be to just end the war as soon as possible. But I think this information that I just gave kind of, calls into question the validity of the justification for dropping the atomic bomb, or at least dropping it in the manner that we did. Because I do agree that the war had to end to save lives, and I do believe that even though because I do disagree with the way the bomb was deployed, I think we should have waited until Stalin entered the war. And then if the Imperial Japanese leadership didn't either give their unconditional surrender or intent to surrender, which I doubt they would have, then deploy the bomb. Because, we can't know if it was because the Japanese thought the U.S. only had one bomb, or if they thought the Soviet Union could act as a potential mediator. But at least if we waited until the Soviet Union declared war to actually deploy the nuclear weapons, then we could have known for sure. And if it was in fact that they thought the Soviet Union could act as a potential mediator, then we would have only had to have deployed one bomb, and half the people who were killed by the atomic bombs wouldn't have died. But here is one last pet peeve I have to address. It's these morons who troll around and say, oh, the Japanese deserved it because of the Nanking Massacre and other crimes committed by Imperial Japan. No, they didn't fucking deserve it. Okay, the argument for the justification of the atomic bombs is not that the Japanese people deserved it because of the crimes that their government committed. It's that the crimes were still ongoing. The suffering in the occupied areas was still ongoing, and it had to be stopped. It was not an act of punishment. And no matter how justified you may argue that the nuclear bombings were, okay, they could be 100% justified. The people who suffered in them did not deserve their fate any more than the countless people slaughtered in Nanking deserved their fate. Okay, both those people were in the wrong place at the wrong fucking time. The civilians of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Nanking did absolutely nothing to deserve what happened to them. So if you had any heart in you, you'd cry for the victims of all three of those cities. That's all I have to say. Peace out.
I've disappeared, don't wonder